Good morning, Liberty. It is Monday morning, February 11th, 2019. My name is Michael Boldin of the 10th Amendment Center. Thank you so much for tuning in to join me today on, this first of the week episode. I hope you had a wonderful weekend, and I hope you're having a good morning or a good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in, whether it's live or in the archive. Today, I want to tell I want to go over an interesting story that I don't think a lot of people have heard. Many people who follow our work here at the 10th Amendment Center, they're aware of the strategy that we've proposed and worked on for a number of years to turn off material support and resources, water, electricity, etc., to federal agencies engaged in mass warrantless surveillance, for example, the Utah Data Center. Now, this can be applied to other things other than just surveillance. And a lot of people think this is pretty awesome. We hear a lot of really interesting feedback on it. But the one question that we often get is, can they actually do this? And rather than just providing the legal background behind it, we talk about the anti-commandeering doctrine and James Madison's advice and Supreme Court precedent and all this kind of stuff. Rather than just talking about that, there's actually a case where a state has done this with a federal agency and it worked. So they actually refused to provide water to a federal agency that needed it. So I thought that was an interesting story to tell. We've got an article, I've got a video that we put here on YouTube as part of our Nullify Season 2 series. You should be able to find links to all the stuff that I plan on talking about, or at least things I thought of off the top of my head that we're going to talk about today, in the show notes, both here and on YouTube, and of course, where we keep all of our archives over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. Now, before getting over to that, I do want to say hi to my friends out in the live chat. I appreciate everyone who joins in, and of course, everyone who's smashing the like button, sharing, leaving comments, etc. There's Joseph Standridge, Justin Bayola, time for a bong and some liberty. Tyler B. Idamon, good morning to you as well. Denver Libertarian says, hello all. I'm sure supporters of the so-called Green New Deal will support this effort to save water. And yet, that's an interesting part of it as well, turning off the water. What I was reading in one of the links that I'm going to briefly cover is a kind of it's a research paper on this whole process, and they reference surveillance as being pollution, not only just polluting the data center, but of course using the water. We don't see this as a prominent argument, Denver Libertarian, yet, but maybe that will catch on. Joseph Standridge, Anna Rays, MRDG, and Bob Brewer down in Tyler, Texas. I appreciate you guys all being here, and I appreciate everyone else who is either watching later on in the archives or listening to our podcast edition of the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google, and of course through the RSS feed as well. So let's get into what's going on here, what I'm talking about, and hopefully this will make sense. First, a little background. As I mentioned, getting into the show here, we came up with this process to turn off resources to the NSA. Back when the Snowden revelations came out back, and I think it was 2013, back when those came out, people started asking me, hey, Boldin, what are you guys going to do about this? What can we do to nullify the NSA? And my immediate thought and response was, well, nothing. What can we do about it? How can states take on a federal surveillance agency? How can they stop them from collecting the data? But, I really kind of dug in and started doing some research anyways. I just wanted to understand the process of the NSA a little further. I had read some from James Bamford over the years, for example, and he's an author that you really want to read about if you want to understand the mass surveillance state, at least on the federal level. And I started coming across these MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding, or MOAs, Memorandums of Agreement, between the NSA and states or political subdivisions, basically an agreement to provide various resources. So as I kept digging and digging and digging, I found a report. I think it actually came from Reuters here, and I'm mentioning this in the first link. It was back in 2006. Now, obviously, this was 7 years later, but Reuters had reported that the NSA had maxed out the capacity of the Baltimore area power grid. And here's what it says, in quotes, the NSA is already unable to install some costly and sophisticated new equipment. At minimum, the problem could produce disruptions leading to outages and power surges. At worst, it could force a virtual shutdown of the agency. Mind you, this is all the way back in 2006. And they were collecting a lot of data at the time. They were keeping track of a lot of things, but they wanted to expand. They basically wanted the capability to monitor everything of everybody, everywhere. That's my belief. And at that point, what they were doing as of 2006, 13 years ago, was enough to shut down the agency because it was going to blow the power grid. So the NSA was very aggressively looking for new locations. And if you think in like a network situation, decentralized or a distributed network, for those of you who are into that kind of network infrastructure, you always think about points of failure. And if you have a single point of failure in any type of a system, it's a very dangerous situation for that system. If one gets shut down, then the whole thing goes down. If you distribute the power or you decentralize, people talk about this a lot in the cryptocurrency sphere, because decentralizing prevents a single entity like a central bank from being able to shut off access to financial instruments. So if you use a distributed network and you put different power sources at different areas, then one going down doesn't bring down the whole network. So the NSA understands this clearly. And they went out aggressively looking for new locations where they could rely on the resources needed to stay operational or to expand. So if they couldn't expand further than they were in Baltimore, but they wanted to expand, they had to go elsewhere. So some of the places they expanded to included San Antonio, Texas. One of the reasons they moved to, well, near San Antonio, in an old Sony warehouse where they actually had access, and now they've built, I think it's even bigger than the Utah Center. They built a massive facility for storing data and collecting and analyzing in Texas because it has an independent power grid. So if the whole country goes down, Texas has its own power grid that they can stay operational so the whole system doesn't go down. And then on top of it, they're also just a couple miles down the road from a new Microsoft data center. I'm not sure, at least on the technical end, if this means that they have better access to the facility, but it seemed when I was reading the paperwork on this, it seemed that that was part of the decision making. In Utah, they built the massive Utah data center that I think made the most attention in the news over the last few years. That one was built primarily because these systems run on a water-cooled infrastructure. The supercomputers there are water-cooled. And Utah provides really cheap access to water. The state of Utah, actually a political subdivision, Bluffdale, and then the water district, they provide the water to the NSA, actually, from what I understand, at lower than market rates. So, I mean, obviously it's a big purchaser of the water, but the amount of water that they need at peak capacity is approximately 1.7 million gallons of water every single day just to stay operational. If they don't run the water cooling system, the machines there overheat and then they shut down. So they have to keep it cool. So they have to keep piping water in. And I'm going through this article here that's linked in the show notes, talking about how there are all these facilities around the country. We know that there are at least 10. There's one in Washington State. There's one in Colorado. Those are some older ones. The Colorado one is being expanded. The Utah one is new. San Antonio is new and massive. Utah is massive as well. The Oak Ridge facility, that's the code-breaking facility in Tennessee. There's one in Georgia, West Virginia. And for all we know, they're working to expand these to other locations because we never hear about them until after the fact. So that's kind of the background for why we came up with this. We recognize that the NSA, as a federal agency, and probably others, has an Achilles heel that they can't operate without resources. Electricity, water, trash collection, snow removal, wastewater removal, all kinds of stuff. And most of the time, those things are provided by not private contractors, but by political subdivisions. So the power grid in Texas is provided by a political subdivision. The power is provided by a political subdivision of the state of Utah. The water in of Texas, and the water in Utah by a water district in Utah, which is part of the state. In Georgia, I think they do garbage collection near the Augusta facility. So you can go on and on and on, covering how this is an important part of it. So we based our strategy, like all of a sudden a light bulb went on here, and I worked with some people to put together some legislation. We put together this strategy that says, well, if we turn off the resources, they can't run the facilities. And then if we say no resources in states where there are no facilities, then they have a harder time to expand. Because one of the main opposition statements against our approach in Utah, for example, is, well, let's say you can turn off the water. Well, then they'll just open it somewhere else. Well, yeah, that's the point. The harder it is for them and the less states that are willing to participate, the more difficult it is for them to do this. So we want to turn it on. Just because some other place is going to be compliant and participate in it doesn't mean that you participate in it as well. I mean, that's in the revolutionary days, that would be the difference between a Tory and a Whig probably. So this is an important strategy, and it can be very effective. We know it comes right from James Madison in Federalist 46, where he said that states and individuals should refuse to cooperate with officers of the Union. Don't participate in the federal programs. Don't help them violate people's rights. And then we also know that the Supreme Court has repeatedly backed this up. Like, I don't like basing my rights or the Constitution based on what the Supreme Court says or doesn't say. But when they do back up what James Madison said, you might as well use this in your strategy, because most people in this realm that are elected to state houses or to legislatures or that do the political activism have some kind of law background, and they care so much. So when you can point to them, to the Supreme Court cases, there are now 5 of them. There were only 4 at the time that this article was written in 2014. There are now 5 cases where the Supreme Court says that the states and their political subdivisions are not required to provide resources or manpower to help effectuate or implement federal programs or regulatory acts, programs, laws, etc. So the feds have to figure out how to do it. So if the feds have done so much spying, for example, that they're not even able to have a functioning facility because they're using so much electricity at their home base at Fort Meade, Maryland, and they have to go out to the states, then they have to find willing partners. And if the states aren't willing partners, then they have a problem. Maybe they should scale back. So the contract in Bluffdale, Utah expires in 2021. We ran into a great roadblock, as a side note, there, where a representative of the National Guard actually told a state legislator to not move forward, scared them off. But one of the, if we get around kind of the military pressure that came down on this, we know that one of the difficult parts in passing this type of legislation in a place where they're already under contract, because we only find out about it after the fact, is that, well, they're under contract till 2021. So the opposition was, well, you can't break this contract. My argument is that the contract was made under false pretenses, so it's null and void. It was made under the pretenses that the NSA was only going to be spying on, quote, foreign terrorists, not on everyone. So I think there is an argument both ways, but the contract expires in 2021, and I think it's very possible we'll see some legislation in the next year or so where Utah says we will not renew those contracts. And I think that would be very positive. But again, so there's all kinds of arguments. There's interesting discussion, but this has actually happened, and it happened in Nevada. I've got a link in the show notes here on YouTube, and we'll also make sure they're available over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty about something that happened in Nevada over the years. And you can see this article here, Nevada beats feds by turning off the water. That's from a volunteer that used to work with us, Lori Rardin. She did a lot of research and worked with Mike Meharry on putting the research together and the article itself. I think it's actually very well done. It's a nice introductory overview. And again, there's another video, Nullify Chapter 15, that I included in the links as well. So this is about Yucca or Yucca Mountain in Nevada. This is a place where it was selected as a nuclear waste dump. Nuclear waste dump in 1987. But it wasn't until 2002, quote, that President Bush and Congress officially approved the site and moved to make the dump a reality. This was not popular in Nevada. For many people, it was an environmental issue. For other people, of course, it was just opposition to the Bush administration, so it's hard to say. And the governor, first of all, filed an official notice of disapproval. So the governor was basically saying, oh, we don't approve of this. Can you put it somewhere else? So this was basically asking the federal government, can you please move this around? We don't want it here. Well, the feds said, no, well, we appreciate your feedback, but no. And that often happens when you just ask government to do something. Now, mind you, this is two different levels of government, but it still has the same kind of response. So one level of government says, would you please move this? We disapprove of it. And that's, even if they didn't say please, that's basically what's happening. So the governor filed this notice, said, we don't want this here. And the Fed said, well, you know, it's not up to you. We're making the decision anyways. The EPA said that now the EPA shouldn't exist. It's not, I don't think it's a constitutional agency. But the EPA, according to its own standards, says this wasn't safe. So instead of saying, well, we got to move it somewhere else, the EPA changed its standards to fit the DOE. So from there, Nevada filed a bunch of lawsuits. But, as Lori writes, the state didn't simply count on the federal courts to protect it. It took some action of its own. Now, they had passed some resolutions in the legislature opposing this. And they may have even passed a law saying we're not allowed to do this. But this is how it basically played out. The short version. Nevada denied the DOE's 5 applications for the use of water to construct and operate the proposed high-level nuclear waste repository at Yucca Mountain. The federal government wanted to continue taking soil samples from the site despite all the negative results it had already obtained. Now, to operate the drill rigs to keep setting up the facility, the feds needed to pump 400 acre-feet of water to the area each year. That is significant. But state law, not federal law, rules the use of groundwater. So in other words, to pump the water in, you basically had to get a state water permit. And what the feds are used to whenever they want to do something is the states simply just say, oh, well, these are our federal partners, or they give us money. Yeah, absolutely. It's very rare, at least in modern times, for a state to say, well, we don't really want to work with our federal partners. And I put it in quotes for those of you watching. I make air quotes because every time I hear about opposition to a nullification bill that's introduced on a state or a local level, the supporters of the monster state always refer to their friends in Washington, D.C. as their federal partners. This is a phrase we hear all over the country at every level of government. So it's rare to see this happen, but it can. And when they do it, it can have a very, very powerful effect. So the Nevada state engineer, he said he was required based according to actions of the state government. He was rejecting the applications for the water. He said it was detrimental to the public interest. So what happens? The Department of Energy then files suit against Nevada in U.S. District Court in Las Vegas. But they allowed them to use a little bit of water for their employees for like bathing, showers, toilets. So I think they made a very smart strategic response there. They said, as long as you're just using it for this, for employees doing other stuff, we're not trying to starve you out. This isn't a medieval response, but you're not allowed. You don't have permission to use the water in these rigs, to run these drill rigs, to continue building this facility. And the feds really take the position that they can do whatever they want. So I think this is very unusual and surprising. They filed a federal lawsuit, and, you know, it went through some stages, but they ended up losing. And it was in 2007. So mind you, this started back in 1987. They selected the location. Then all the way to 2002, the Bush administration finally says, we're going to start doing this. Then Nevada responds saying, no way, we don't want you here. And then they start denying water permits. I mean, I don't know who figured out that they could just do this. But think of all the different ways that a federal agency starts coming into your area. And then you say, well, no, we're not going to give you permits for this. Because in every situation, that is exactly how it's playing out. Now, you may not get away with it in other areas, but using groundwater like this, I think, is seen as very serious. And I think you can build a wider coalition as well. So this is what the judge said all the way in 2007. So now we're 20 years in. Well, it's 5 from when they finally decided that was going to be Nevada. But I think a lot of people knew it was going there anyway, so there was already opposition being built up. So 20 years later, 5 years of aggressive work, already delaying. And the more that you can create roadblocks, the more difficult it becomes, the more expensive it becomes, and the more likely they might even abandon things. So roadblocks, even if they didn't win in federal court, this would create a very interesting scenario. This reminds me in some ways of opposition to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and the previous one that had passed. Some of the northern states, Ohio, Michigan, and others, they were starting to look at the approach of arresting federal agents for capturing alleged escaped slaves. They knew that in a case like that, if they tried to arrest a federal agent, the case would get moved to federal court and would get thrown out. They wouldn't be able to pull it off. But they saw it as a bargaining chip. The mentality of some of the people was basically, let's do this. It'll just create clogs in the machinery. We'll do it over and over and over, and it'll just kind of break things down. It's a mentality of, look, what they're doing is incredibly bad. We're totally opposed to it here. Even if we can't get the courts to side with us, let's go for it and slow them down. And then as they're slowed down or put on pause, let's figure out another way to stop them. And I think that's a very important part of the overall strategy. So this, turning off the water, I'm not sure if they expected to win in court. They did get sued. They flat out denied it. And over a period of 4+ years, they just refused to give the water permits. I think the feds tried to take it anyways, and I'll have to look into some details on that over time. But this is what the district judge said in 2007. Quote, the validity of Western states' groundwater rights and the right to regulate water in the public interest is not a right to be taken lightly, nor is it a right that can cavalierly be ignored or violated by a federal agency. In other words, even a federal judge said, federal government, you have to respect the state on whether or not you can use their water. So I think that says a lot. And in my impression, this same type of approach would work for using electricity in the independent power grid in Texas. I know Jonathan Stickland, a state representative a few years ago, filed a similar bill to turn off the electricity to the NSA facility in San Antonio. He got panned pretty aggressively in the media. But this was before anyone was really talking about this. No one was really, and I don't think even today many people are talking about this. But interestingly enough, I found when I was doing some research to go back to this story, because I haven't really covered it in a few years myself, but I found this this research paper over at Sage Journals by a guy named Mel Hogan, Big Data in Society, Data Flows and Water Woes, the Utah Data Center. And he's talking about, this person writes about environmental issues, data centers. And I think he got interested in this because of this intersection between the use of resources and the data center and the surveillance. And he writes here in this research article, quote, I look at how water is an intriguing and politically relevant part of the surveillance infrastructure and how it has been constructed as the main tool for activism in this case, and how it may eventually help transform the public's conceptualization of big data as deeply material. And he even referenced it, as I mentioned earlier, as pollution. It's a waste of resources. I mean, if you think about whatever your view is on environmental protection, I think most of us want to be good stewards of nature, of natural resources. I think where the big difference comes in between, I think, people maybe like you and I and the Green New Deal type, the big environmentalist type, is that they believe that the federal government, likely the greatest polluter on the face of the earth. I mean, well, maybe not the whole earth, but at least in this country, huge polluter is the U.S. federal government, the U.S. Mint, the Pentagon, etc. They want that same organization to somehow protect us, protect the environment. To me, I think that's absurd. I think the federal government is the worst place to do that. That doesn't mean that the states themselves would be great at it, but I definitely don't want the worst people. I don't want the most dangerous, the most aggressive, the ones that, I mean, if you think about the environmentalists, it's almost absurd that they see Donald Trump as the most dangerous president in history, and then yet they're still willing to call on the central government, the federal government, to have more power over the environment. It's as if that they think that the president today is just a fluke and no one like him could ever come along again, because they want to hand that person more power. And what would that person do with all that power but flip it around? So it's pretty absurd that they would ever want to do that. So I think we're all very much in support of taking care of our resources. And if you're thinking about water being used and blown off as steam because it's used as a coolant, 1.7 million gallons of water every single day. It's not something that they can truck in. You can't, I mean, the logistics of there would then render the whole point of going to Utah pointless. So when that contract expires, I think it would be very likely that they would up and move. Denver Libertarian points out, indeed, how much money has been spent domestically cleaning up former military bases. Absolutely. And overseas, I think the same thing. Iwo Jima, not Iwo Jima. I'm thinking of the island off of Japan, Okinawa. There's a lot of environmental degradation as well, degradation there. So yes, all the resources that are wasted, the water that's wasted, and then the cleanup on top of it, and the money to spend that's doing all this. Whereas this could be used by the people or by a business or by nature. I mean, shouldn't things be growing from water? Shouldn't people be bathing and drinking and cooking with it, not burning it off to spy on everyone? I mean, to me, this is a great injustice that someday history will look very, very badly upon. So this, I'm not really going to go through this. I just wanted to make a few comments about it. I think this is a very interesting research article. It's really long. So you can download it as a PDF, or you can just grab the link here and read through it. But if you're watching here, I'm scrolling. It's a really long piece. I thought it was cool that this is someone that we've never worked with, that really probably is not in our sphere of influence at the 10th Amendment Center. And they wrote about our efforts here in just kind of an interesting way in their research about how this is an important part of the process, referring to big data surveillance centers as pollution and the waste of resources and the potential effectiveness of doing it. I included a couple more links in the show notes that I think are just tied in. I'm not really going to cover them here, but you can research them, of course. Show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. In 2016, Mike Meharry reported on a law that was passed in Colorado that I think is a foundational step. It was basically saying that Colorado is now going to start applying state water laws to federal agencies specifically. So in Colorado, they now have a law on the books that definitely says that state water law applies to the federal government. They now, it's only in certain situations. They name specifically BLM and the U.S. Forest Service, but they could expand that to other federal agencies, DOE, NSA, whatever, because we know that the importance of Western state water rights is I think it really should be the same everywhere, but that judge, a Western judge, recognized the importance of water rights in Western states. So Colorado has a law on the books from 3 years ago now, HB 1106, that applies state water law to federal agencies. And then there's a bill that's being considered right now in New Hampshire, House Bill 704. And it basically reaffirms, quote, New Hampshire's unyielding opposition to any effort of the federal government to site a nuclear waste dump anywhere in the state and to reenact the High-Level Radioactive Waste Act, and basically say that it's illegal for the federal government to do this. Now, if they're smart there, they will look to Nevada and try to apply the same approach, which dragged this on and on and on well over a decade. And if you look all the way back to 87, now, what is that? 7, over 3 decades. Sorry, my government education is bad on math. But these are things that I think you can read over in your own time. They're definitely related. Foundationally, the Colorado law and the New Hampshire bill that's up for consideration right now, House Bill 704. And I think if this catches on, we'll see more and more of this over time. I know that over at Think Progress, a few years ago, they definitely warned against using this strategy. And I mentioned this in a previous show recently, how they said, oh, the libertarian think tank 10th Amendment Center will definitely start applying this to other things. And absolutely. But it's nice to see that it's kind of catching on. People are finding some interest, even just on the surface or on the edges, maybe, fringes. They're showing some interest in using this type of approach to deal with Washington, D.C. So some more interesting comments over in the chat. We nuked Iraq and Afghanistan, says Frank, with depleted uranium ammo. Yeah, then that stuff stays for a long, long time. Anna Ray's, there's EHP training, late but smashed the like. Thank you so much. And Justin points out, what if federal fish hatcheries have done to the environment? I don't know, actually. Well, that's really interesting. My interest in the environmental issue really has only led me to really look at the U.S. Mint and the Pentagon as being really dangerous environmental polluters. But I hope you guys found something interesting here, something that you can use strategically in your own approach to what is important to you. Justin said we'll clue you in with some stuff. Awesome. I will take links. If you've got ideas or things that I need to learn about or follow-up stuff, feel free to post in the comments or send me an email, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. It's all spelled out. I read all of them, or Mike Meharry reads them. We don't get back to everything, but we definitely appreciate any feedback. Denver Libertarian says, aren't most federal buildings required to have some sort of LEED rating? How does that work into the water usage at these facilities? I don't know. That's interesting. And on top of it, I mean, if you think about turning off resources to any federal agency that is conducting mass surveillance, that's basically, I mean, the Postal Service, the FBI, DHS, all these, the DEA, they're all conducting warrantless mass surveillance, and they need to be stopped. Whether this will catch on and be effective in the long run is really up to the general public, to the market at large. But I think it is a very effective strategy. We see how it worked in Nevada. They shut it down. They ended up having to abandon the project. I know Trump has wanted to push it forward, but it's still not happening. Here it is in 2019, another 12 years after that court case in 2007. So at least since the Bush administration said in 2002, we're talking 17 years. And even if they end up doing it, they've been able to slow down the project 17 years. And any federal program that is slowed down or stopped for 17 years, I think is a win. And it gives us way more potential to stop that permanently. So good job to Nevada. That's what Justin Bayola, Nevada-like attaboy. That's right. So I hope you guys found this educational. I really, this to me is extremely interesting. You've got a lot of stuff to read if you're interested in doing further reading. Again, the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. I'll have that updated about 30 minutes or so after the show is done airing. And of course, thank you again for joining me today. I'm very grateful for those of you who want to spend some time with me, a part of your day with me, hearing me talk on and on about various issues. In the coming episodes, I'm thinking of a show about the shutdown. I feel like if this is going to happen again, we definitely should cover it. Of course, next week, Monday, is President's Day. So I saw an article over at fee.org that said some of the worst quotes by some of the worst presidents. So maybe we'll go over that a little bit. And then if you've got ideas, send them over to team@10thamendmentcenter.com. I'd love to hear them. And of course, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time here, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Have a great day.